What up, what up? Salvador Briggman here. Welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. On this show, we talk about everything crowdfunding, how to raise money, how to get funding for your dream and attract a ton of backers, a ton of an audience, I guess you could say, in order to make your dream a reality. Turn that passion into profit. You know what I'm saying? Well, I think that so many of the episodes and so many of the people that I've had on, I feel super privileged to be able to speak with people who have raised 6 and 7 figures with crowdfunding. And you can see obviously the episodes and the different types of entrepreneurs and people. And today's episode is no different. You know, a guy who raised over $400K for a physical product is super cool. And also in the camera space, that is so neat. But one of the things I think that's really important is just to really get back to and to think about why it is that you're doing this. You know, why is it that you're spending extra time listening to podcasts just like this? Why is it that you're investing in your own training and education and your own ability to pull something off, right? Just the even the gutsiness to believe that you can do that you can bet on yourself and you can win. That takes grit, man. That just takes gumption. And just for anyone who is embarking on this process, I really admire that so much. And because I think it takes fortitude. I think it takes perseverance. And it's not just about wanting to raise a bunch of money, which is nice. Don't get me wrong, that's awesome, right? But it's also about making a dent in the universe. It's about making an impact in the lives of other people, and to also bring something that was in your head into reality. And that's what we do. That's what we do as human beings. As human beings, you look at the world around you. Maybe you're in your studio apartments, maybe you're in your office, maybe you're in your massive 2,000 square foot house or whatever it is, right? Maybe you're out, jogging and you're just looking around. Wherever it is you are, if you look around, all the products, walls, concrete, flooring, glass, everything around you, the buildings, the houses, the cars, the subway, right? The books, everything around you was made by other people, man. Everything around you was made by someone else. And we've all been able to do that. As a group, as humanity, right? As a group, we've been able to bond together to create teams of people to be able to create new products. And those products have gone on to change other people's lives, whether that's a card game to bring entertainment and fun moments into a family, if that's a new book that changes the world, or something that's like a film that changes our perspective on the world and instills new values into our kids, right? All these things are done by other people, and there's no reason that you can't do the next thing. And that's what today's episode is about. So you're going to hear from an individual who was able to raise over $400K, more than 3,000 backers for a new camera device that attaches and makes your iPhone almost like a DSLR camera. And it's super cool. The engineering behind this is insane. Really slick design, right? And you might think I could never do something like that. Dude, I'm telling you, if you follow the steps, if you commit yourself to the process, if you're willing to bet on your own vision and you want to make a difference, that's the key thing. You want to make it some kind of a difference. That's what's going to pull you through this process. And you can follow all the tactics, the training, the steps, all the tips that I give, right? But at the end of the day, that number one thing is what's going to pull you through. So think about your why. That being said, I'm going to share one resource with you, and then we can get into today's podcast episode. So the resource I want to share with you today is if you want to join my free course that goes in depth through how to launch a campaign on Kickstarter, you can go to this link at crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter. That link is crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter, crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter. If you've never done one of these campaigns before, or you just kind of want to brush up on your knowledge, maybe you've done one a long time ago, right? You can go to that link, crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter, and you can begin to get some of my free training videos delivered straight into your inbox, as well as with all of my enthusiasm and passion, as you know. Thank you for listening, and it's coming up right after this. If you're worried about the fulfillment and shipping part of your Kickstarter campaign when it comes to getting out all those perks and rewards to your backers, rest assured I've put together a complete Kickstarter fulfillment and shipping checklist for you, and it's free. This is sponsored by the folks at Fulfillrite, and they thought that you should have this checklist as part of your arsenal going into a crowdfunding campaign. If you want to get instant access to this checklist and it's free, you can go to fulfillrite.com/checklist. Again, that is FULFILLRITE.com/checklist. fulfillright.com/checklist. Just go to that link and you can download it immediately. Hey guys, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Today we have a smash success on the show, also from Norway, which is really interesting. We're going to hear a lot about some of the advice and tips they have for you, also a little bit about the product, and looking forward to getting into the interview. Victor, we have the founder here on the show. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Salvador. It's my pleasure.
Sure, man. Why don't we get started? You can just tell the listeners a bit about your products and your story when it comes to creating this.
Cool. So the product that we've built is Fjorden, and it's an iPhone camera grip. It turns your iPhone into a proper camera and gives you professional precision camera controls, just like you're used to from, your real camera, like your DSLR. The key design consideration was to make it pocketable. And the backstory was, I've always loved photography and I've always spent way too much money on cameras. And even though I have lots of great cameras, I have a full frame Sony DSLR, I have some premium compacts like the Lumix LX100, most of the time I noticed I just still use my iPhone because I always have it with me. So this cliche about the best camera is the one you have with you, I think is totally true. And, I wondered, how can I make my iPhone a better camera that replicates the shooting experience that I get from my high-end other cameras? And for me, that was in adding physical controls. So even though it's super pocketable, it's the same thickness together with your iPhone, the same thickness as an Apple AirPods case. The device itself is about 1 centimeter, and together with your iPhone, it's about 2 centimeters.
Very cool.
So even though it's super slim and pocketable, it has everything that you need to really control your camera like a pro. It has a 2-stage shutter button, half press to focus, full press to release. It has a multifunction control dial, so you can use that to adjust exposure value, shutter speed, ISO. You can click it to change the parameter that you're affecting with a dial. Then there's another multifunction button that you can assign different functions to, like, for example, triggering video recording, triggering portrait mode, triggering the flash mode. That's completely up to you. Then there's a zoom lever, and those are the photographic features. But in addition, it's also a kickstand. So we built in a friction hinge, allowing you to use the device in portrait and landscape mode as a kickstand for video calls, watching Netflix with your morning coffee. And the whole thing has a quick release clip, so it detaches from your iPhone in about, a second. And that was really important to me because I wanted a device that I can keep using when I upgrade my iPhone.
Yeah, definitely.
There have been similar devices around, like either an iPhone case form factor or fairly big clunky device that you attach to your iPhone. But, I wanted something small and pocketable and yet upgradable. So it's separate from the iPhone case. And that means you can swap it around between different phones. You can keep using it when you upgrade. So that's the product in a nutshell. Yeah,
I love it, man. It's super sleek, looks really cool. Can't tell my girl about this, or she'll have me taking photos of her all day. Looks beautiful, looks great. So, when it comes to you, have you designed products before? Was this your first product? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's my first hardware product, and that's been an interesting learning curve. But I should add that it's not my first company. So I previously founded a software company called Mendeley, which I started in 2008. And then over the next 5 years, grew it into actually the world's largest platform for scientific research. And we sold that company for $100 million back in 2013.
Congratulations.
So, Thanks. And that was a crazy ride, of course, as well. And I've, talked about it in different events and been interviewed about it. So that was my formative experience as an entrepreneur, building a software company, which relied heavily on, building community as well. But in terms of business model, it mostly relied on B2B. So we were selling to universities. We had Stanford, Harvard, MIT as clients. And so I didn't really have experience with e-commerce, and I didn't have experience with building hardware products. I did invest in hardware products, though. So I've been an active angel investor for the past 8 or 9 years. And I think the majority of my investments, I think about 10 or so, have been in hardware and deep tech products. So I would say I've always been drawn to the creation of physical products, but I had, no idea what it takes to actually build one. And so when I started with the very first step I took was, well, I should back up a bit and tell you about, how I came up with the idea and how I then went about making it. So as I've said, the initial spark for the idea was wanting to have a device that turns my iPhone into a better camera. And I started tinkering, with just cardboard prototypes. I came up with an idea for a form factor where you would have a little sort of, flat rectangular thingy that you could shove into a cutout in an iPhone case, and that you could then kind of slide open to turn it into a grip shape that's sort of like a DSLR camera grip. And in fact, if you go to the Fjorden Kickstarter campaign page, I have an update there on the Kickstarter campaign where I walk through the prototyping process, and I have photos of everything from the first cardboard models through to the various iterations that we had to the final product. But so the cardboard model was my first, attempt to figuring out, could I come up with a form factor that made sense and that felt good in the hand? And when I found that I could, I started trying to figure out, okay, how can I actually build this? Because like I said, I have no experience building hardware, and I'm not even an engineer. So my background is I have a business degree and then did a PhD in social psychology and consumer behavior, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, so completely, unrelated backgrounds. But so I found a blog online called Predictable Hardware, if I'm not mistaken. Predictable, or is it Predictable Designs? One of the two. I think if you Google Predictable Hardware or Predictable Designs, you'll find it. And it's a blog that kind of gives tips about, developing hardware products, but then also offers a service where you can get the guy who runs the blog, who's a hardware engineer, to, based on your description of the product, he will come up with a preliminary bill of materials. He'll kind of draw up, kind of a layout of what the electronics could look like. It just gives you a really good sense of, how could you make this product happen and what would it cost to build?
Yeah, kind of takes you out of like just that idea, right? And really thinking about how could this become reality?
Yeah. And I think that was one of the very first things I wanted to find out. Could I make this in a cost-effective manner that I could then, turn into a marketable product? And, jumping ahead slightly, I think one of the key learnings is how very important it is to really, truly understand the cost of the product that you're making. That's absolutely crucial for the campaign. And so kind of that's also where I started with this, hardware design review. I got a good sense of, what would it cost to make? And these super early projections for the bill of materials and the assembly cost, even though they were based on literally like a 3-paragraph description of what I wanted to make, they turned out to be surprisingly accurate. Even though we kept refining the product, we switched out some components, we went through the whole prototyping and building process and then design for manufacturing and assembly through to the final binding quotes from contract manufacturers, it was generally all in the right ballpark. So that was an extremely helpful starting point for figuring out, was this a product that was commercially viable?
What do you think really drew you in when it comes to the making of that initial prototype? Because you think about software, like software is incredible because, it scales super easy, really high margins, great business to be in. This doesn't seem like it was as motivated when it comes to like, I don't know, getting a huge ROI, right? It's like, really, how do we make something incredible? And where do you think that motivation comes from with you?
Yeah, it's true. It's certainly a passion product. But so was my first company, so was Mendeley. I think both were born out of some frustration that I had in my personal life as, either in my work as a PhD student. With Mendeley, what I wanted to do was create a product that would help me organize my research better, collaborate more easily, share scientific data and files with people that I was collaborating with. And then Mendeley grew out of that and turned into, a massive business and exit. And with Fjorden, likewise, I've been into photography for my whole life. In the Kickstarter campaign, you can actually see some Super 8 footage taken in 1983 when I was 3 years old with my first camera, which I still have. It's a Rollei 35. And I've always been drawn to the mechanical beauty of cameras, the dials, the levers, how satisfying it is to play around with, all of these mechanical components.
Definitely. Yeah, a lot of fun.
And and so for me, that was the starting point. I wanted to, make something, in this case, Fjorden, that would make photography more fun. And that's how I started doing it.
How long were you working on this before you really began the launch process of doing a Kickstarter?
A good while. I think I started the cardboard prototypes around October or November 2019, and then spent the whole of 2020 prototyping, plus, filing patents and trademarks. I think the prototyping process itself, moving ahead a couple of months. So after the cardboard prototype and the hardware design review, I found an industrial design agency in Oslo that I started working with. They're called Frost Product. And I met with lots of different industrial design agencies, and Frost was the one that I liked best for several reasons. They also had like an entrepreneurial DNA. They had been the co-founders of Oslo Bike Sharing, but they also had experience designing electronics products and consumer electronics products. And I just really got on with them on a personal level, which I think is really important as well. And so I was very eager to work with them. And because they were entrepreneurial, they also were willing to work partially for equity. So I paid them some cash, and also I paid them an equity. So I wanted to ensure that they were aligned and, the long-term value that we're creating. And that's worked extremely well.
I assume they were helping with the design element, right?
Yeah, so they, let me walk you through what we did. So we started out with a brainstorming process where we kind of took a step back from the original form factor that I, had built as a cardboard model, because we wanted to find out, did we maybe overlook a better solution for this problem that I was trying to solve? And so in brainstorming, we came up with 5 different form factors that we then started building super low resolution with, foam blocks and cardboard and plastic sheets, just to get a sense of what the ergonomics of these form factors would look like and how they would feel in the hand. Then we narrowed that down to 3 of the most promising ones and started CAD modeling and 3D printing, and kept refining these 3 models with, button placement, sizes, hinge placements, etc. And then after a couple of months of that, we, narrowed it down to the final one that you now see on the Kickstarter and Indiegogo, the final form factor. And in parallel, we started doing the, electronics engineering, working with an engineer that had been their co-founder on Oslo Bike Sharing. So also a person that they knew. And so with that in hand, we started building some prototypes. And, fast forward a couple of months, to answer your question, I think we spent about, give or take, a year of prototyping.
That's insane, man. That's a lot of work.
Yeah. It was a lot of work and also quite expensive, but totally worth it. We ended up with a really polished prototype that we also could showcase in the Kickstarter video. And I think that's what enabled us to pull off a successful campaign.
There are so many functions and features that are a part of this. How do you decide what to include and what to leave out when you're making something like this, right? Because you guys have a lot of stuff that you've just compacted in one device.
Yeah, I think that's something that I really got wrong in my first Mendeley. Because there, I was a first-time entrepreneur, and every idea that you have kind of feels important, and you think, oh, it's so important that this gets built into the product. And if you're not an engineer by training or by experience, then you don't really understand the problem that too many features cause in terms of the complexity and the technical debt that you're building up. If you try and build too many features with too few people, you end up with many half-baked features that you need to maintain, and kind of none of them really work as well as they should. Whereas if you focus on fewer features and really polish those, then you end up having a great user experience. So I think that was in my mind this time around. I was always, erring on the side of, let's rather do fewer things, but do them right. I mean, one specific example is when we started out, we thought, let's do this for iOS and Android, because the hardware itself, works just as well with Android phones as with iOS. But the challenge comes on the software side. So it's, comparatively easy to make camera apps for the iPhone because the APIs for the software are well documented. But on Android, it's not so easy because each each handset manufacturer, Google, Huawei, Samsung, Oppo, they each expose slightly different APIs, different capabilities for their cameras. And so to build a cohesive camera experience that works well across all Android devices is really, really tricky. And so we decided, okay, let's just focus on iOS for the time being, and then focus on making that a really great user experience.
So it sounds to me like all of your decisions are based on thinking about the person that's going to be using this, right? And kind of working backwards from there versus like, how can we do all this cool tech stuff and maybe people enjoy it, right? You're really thinking back from the customer.
I think that comes back to your previous question. What drew me to this problem or this company? And like I said, it's been problems that I've been wanting to solve for myself. And so I'm always the first user of these products that I'm building, both with Mendeley and with Fjorden. And of course, I'm not claiming that I'm infallible, far from it. I probably have different priorities, or as an early adopter, I might have, different expectations of products or, things that I'm willing to put up with. compared to the average consumer. But I think it's still super important that you really understand the market that you're building for and the problem that you're solving. And so, working backwards from the user experience flows from that. Like if you're the user yourself, you really know what the problem is that you're trying to solve and what the pain points are and what you want to focus on. Because, it's a reasonably safe bet that if you have that, you're probably not the only person that has it.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. So walk me to the day before launch here. I mean, you've obviously had, sold your company for a good chunk of change before. Were you still nervous? Like you're going into a new launch and this thing is going to be unveiled on Kickstarter. You spent so much time on it. Do you still feel nervous? What is that feeling like the day before you go live?
Oh, Jesus Christ. I was so nervous. Having done a previous company, at least for me, didn't alleviate that in the slightest. I mean, there's this saying in Hollywood, you're only as good as your next one. Right? And I think that kind of applies to startups as well. It doesn't really matter that much what you've done before, unless it's been, a super unicorn. Like, if you're the founder of Uber or something, then, VCs and others will bash your door and give you tons of money up front. And I was reasonably successful. And our exit back in 2013 was one of the larger ones in Europe, but that was, 8 years ago. And I've done some angel investments, but I'm not like, a startup superstar. And irrespective of, what I've done in the past, I'm also a perfectionist. And the main thing, with my first startup and now, the main thing that I always see is the things that don't work yet. I see the issues that I still have to solve, the problems, the things that don't look as good as they should, not as polished as they should. And so literally, the day before launch, literally 10 minutes before launch, we were still polishing the Kickstarter landing page. We weren't ready to launch until 10 minutes before. And that is, one of the other things that I think I completely underestimated with the Kickstarter launch is how much work goes into actually polishing the page. You kind of think, it's one page. It's a one-pager website. But then there's so many subsections and the structure of it is so important. And then how do you find
it's a sales page? Yeah.
The visual polish, the fonts, the colors. How do you work in the right GIFs, the animated bits to highlight the best features of your product? So that was a lot more work than I anticipated before. And that's what kind of consumed my time literally up to 10 minutes before launch.
Down to the wire there. I mean, now you have over 3,000 people that have supported this, that have pre-ordered it. You have more obviously on in demand. What does that feel like now that you're going to have all these people, thousands of people around the world who are going to have this thing in their hands someday?
To be honest, I'm terribly bad at celebrating successes. Like I said, I always just focus on what's not working and what's not right. So I did breathe a sigh of relief, once we crossed a certain number of backers that I had set in my mind as this is kind of the minimum that I'm hoping we can achieve. And then, reaching the $500,000 was my dream goal. So when we did cross that line, about 12 hours before the end of the campaign, I was like, wow, this is awesome. And that amazing feeling lasted for about 3 minutes. And I was like, okay, so what's the next problem that we got to solve? And then I'm sorry to say, we repeated the same mistake. I underestimated the amount of effort necessary to get our Shopify store live. And then we spent, I think the last week or so before the end of the Kickstarter campaign, scrambling like mad, trying to get the Shopify store ready for launch. And then again, literally 12 hours before the end of the Kickstarter campaign, and thus 12 hours before we were set to go live with the Shopify store, we decided that it just wasn't good enough, And then we did a last-minute scramble to transfer everything over to Indiegogo in demand. And so that's how we ended up launching the Indiegogo campaign instead.
So let me ask you a question here. Do you think that's just an attitude towards marketing in general? Like, oh, this is just easy, we just throw this together? Or do you think that's just there isn't enough documentation about this whole Kickstarter launch process?
A good question. I think it's part personality. I tend to be over-optimistic on everything that I tackle and about how much time it's going to take me. And I'd say that's 90% of it. With Kickstarter, I feel there is, plenty of documentation. And also another piece of advice that I would give every aspiring creator is to sign up to Launch Studio, which is this masterclass run by Giulio Terra, the former head of technology projects at Kickstarter. And that's an amazing curriculum that walks you through everything that you really need to prepare for the Kickstarter campaign. And, I went through that and prepared as well as I could, and still I underestimated how much effort it was. And so, I think it's just my personality.
What's one or two things you could share with the audience you think that would be useful for them to know? So you mentioned about like the Kickstarter campaign and like the time it takes to put that together. Are there any things on the marketing side that you would share that you think people would benefit from knowing, whether that's like a hack or a trick or something that you learned along the way?
Yeah. I don't really think that there are hacks or tricks or shortcuts, really. I think it comes down to, first of all, like I said earlier, knowing your cost. Because if you really know your cost, then you know how much you can spend on the pre-launch campaign, which I'll come to in a second, and then how much you can spend on, affiliate marketing, referral codes, referral campaigns, and also on the live ad campaign when your Kickstarter is live. If you don't really understand your cost, your bill of materials and what it's going to cost to not just build and assemble, but also to ship and handle the returns, etc., of your product, then it's very easy to spend way too much on customer acquisition, and that's going to come back and really bite you in the ass later. And you could end up in a terrible spot where every customer that you gain is losing you money. That's not the situation that you want to be in. So knowing your cost is the number one thing.
Yeah, because that kind of enables you what you can do, like you were saying.
Yeah. So once you know your cost, I would say the biggest driver of your campaign success is going to be the pre-launch campaign. And we didn't do this on our own. We hired an agency called Nuke. They're based in the UK, in Manchester. And they did a fantastic job in setting up, the pre-launch landing page, like driving traffic to that landing page with Facebook and Instagram ads, capturing, those people on the landing page into a mailing list, and then also keeping that mailing list active with regular mailouts. And they just took a huge amount of work off my hands doing that. And also, of course, they brought their expertise to the project. And for me, as a first-time Kickstarter creator and first-time sort of e-commerce entrepreneur, that was incredibly helpful. And, it doesn't come free, of course. We invested a lot of money upfront in the ad campaign to build a massive pre-launch mailing list. I think we had about 12,500 people on that list, so that we could, when the campaign went live an hour before that, we sent out a massive email blast to that email list saying, okay, it's live now, go ahead, back it. And so that meant we pretty much hit our funding target in, I think, an hour and a half or 2 hours, something like that.
That's awesome, man. I think that's exactly what you have to do, right? Is to warm people up before you introduce them to a new product and like get them excited. Talk about Apple, right? People wanting to line out the door before they actually are able to go in the shop and buy it. Like that creates anticipation.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think like the average person should budget for doing like a pre-launch or something like that, in terms of doing and getting all this stuff together they got to do?
I think that's a highly individual question, right? It depends on your own personal situation, like what is the budget that you have at your disposal, where you may be able to also raise some additional angel investment upfront. I've been lucky that because I've had a previous startup success that I did have funds of my own. I also raised additional funding from a couple of friends of mine who are entrepreneurs. And then, as an added bonus here in Norway, there's a government agency called Innovation Norway, Innovasjon Norge. And they also have some generous grants and interest-free loans, which I was able to tap. So all of those things enabled me to spend, tens of thousands on pre-launch marketing. I think the key consideration, other than your personal situation and the funds that you have, is the type of product that you have, right? So if your product sells for a low price, let's say you have a product that's going to sell for $20, $30 a piece, it's going to be very hard to make that profitable once you factor in the cost per click, people coming to your landing page. Then only a fraction of those are going to convert to your mailing list, and then only a fraction of those in turn will convert into backers. I think if you can get your cost per backer or cost per acquisition down to, let's say, $30 to $40, you're probably doing well for a crowdfunding project. Going by the rule of thumb, that your product probably needs to retail for at least 3 to 4 times the acquisition cost, I would say that unless you can sell your product for $100 plus, it's going to be very difficult to make that work just with an ad campaign. So you'll have to find other sources of traffic. Referring back to the Launch Studio Masterclass, they have lots of templates and Excel sheets that help you simulate different acquisition channels and help you figure out, okay, given some assumptions about my bill of materials, my product manufacturing cost, what are reasonable amounts to spend on acquisition? What other channels are there? What can I expect to get from those channels in terms of backers? You can plug in your numbers of, I have X many friends that I can email. Let's assume 10% of those are going to convert. How many backers will that give me? If I have a product that's ready to be sent out to press, how many people can I send it to? What is that going to generate in terms of backers? So I think doing your modeling beforehand, how much can you expect from different acquisition channels is super helpful in calibrating your expectations and also your budgets.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so it obviously makes sense that the pre-launch is something that can help you kind of light the fire a bit, but you also got to add some different logs from some other places as well, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of what you're saying. Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, man. So I just have like one or two more questions here. I want to be conscious of your time. So one of my questions for you was there anything that surprised you with doing this entire launch process, being on Kickstarter, that you learned about the product or people, what they want to buy? Anything that surprised you in general about the process?
About the process itself, like I said, I think the biggest surprise was how much work it was just to get that campaign page live. I was prepared for the amount of work that it took to shoot the video and get the edit right and all of that. But yeah, the campaign page really surprised me. And then, like I said, similarly, the amount of work to get your Shopify store, your e-commerce store live after that, because then suddenly you're dealing with additional complexities that you don't really have to face in a Kickstarter or Indiegogo campaign, like tax considerations, suddenly having to define your shipping costs, having to figure out who do you charge VAT or sales tax, how do you do that? How do you account for different SKUs and product variations that you don't really have to define that well on Kickstarter, right? On Kickstarter, you say, back this package, and then you can let the backers select the details later in BackerKit, for example. But when you launch your e-commerce store, all of those things have to be predefined in the shop, and then you really have to nail those things. So that was kind of a surprise for me. Other than that, I think not really surprises. It's more like I didn't really have frames of reference for how successful or expensive different acquisition channels would be, because it was my first time campaign. So things that positively surprised me are how much traffic and how much backers you can gain from successful cross promotions. We didn't really do a lot of them. We were very picky. We only wanted to do them with very, very closely related products. So for example, we had a couple of camera apps that we handed out referral and affiliate codes to before the campaign. But other than that, we only did, I think, one other cross promotion with a related product, Big Softy, which is an LED mobile lighting unit for mobile photography and videography. And that drove a good chunk of backers to us. And then at the end of the campaign, we managed to gain a promotion from Moment, which is, of course, a super successful company that originated on Kickstarter with the Moment lenses and cases, but now they've expanded to this massive web store. You can find it at Shop Moment, where they sell everything that creators might need, from camera gear to courses to travel and trips, etc. And we'd been in touch with them before the campaign and vaguely discussed collaboration opportunities. But I think then halfway through the campaign, and they saw that we had good demand and that we had traction, and people had, we had made our product, the Fjorden iPhone case, compatible with Moment lenses, and we had a lot of demand for that combination. Moment were like, oh yeah, okay, let's do a cross promotion. And that was a massive boost. I think they drove nearly 10%, I think around 8% of entire volume on Kickstarter in the last, I would say, 48 hours.
That's big.
So that was huge for us. And looking back, I probably should have done more of these cross promotions with other products that I liked. You can expect a fairly low conversion rate, but yeah, I think I just should have done more of those.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was just doing an interview with the Nomadic guys earlier, and they were talking about also doing influencers was huge for their campaign. So I can imagine that would just be really good. But you guys crushed it anyway, so you're doing great. My last question for you is kind of in light of one of the things you mentioned earlier. So I know you've had a lot of success here, and you don't spend a lot of time thinking about that, and you just kind of move on to the next thing. But if you had to pick, what would you say is the most rewarding part of this entire years long, journey getting to this point? What would you say is the most rewarding part?
It's different things. I mean, for me, well, one of the most rewarding things is always to have an idea that exists, initially just in your head and then seeing it become reality. So you get, different, I think you get to repeat that moment. Like for me, it was from the cardboard one the cardboard model that I found exciting already, to then getting the first 3D prints, to getting the first working prototype, to getting the final prototype and doing a video shoot with it where you can see actual photographers using it. And then, of course, getting enthusiastic responses from backers is hugely rewarding. When you see that other people believe in your vision and what you've built, and that's so. Yeah, I think it's just seeing your creations become a reality.
From cardboard to Kickstarter. It's a great title.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, where can people go to learn more about this? I know you're on In Demand. I don't know if you want to shoot out a link as well to your site that might be up at some point. Where can people go to learn more?
I think the best is to go to fjorden.co, so .co. We didn't get the .com, unfortunately. So fjorden.co is where you'll find the current Indiegogo campaign and in the future our store.
Okay, and that's FJORDEN, right? .co.
That's right.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. Congratulations on your success, this whole new project, and look forward to seeing more different accessories and gear come out in the future with you guys, I'm sure. So appreciate you coming on, and thank you for sharing all those great tips.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Again, my name is Salvador Briggman. I got a YouTube channel, man. I got a podcast. I got a bunch of stuff out there. I got some books out there for you. The Kickstarter Launch Formula, great book. I got tons of courses and stuff that you can follow in order to get past how to launch one of these campaigns. Like, there's all that stuff out there, all the knowledge, all the things that you need to do, right? But at the end of the day, the question is, who's going to hold your hand, right? Who's going to guide you? You need a mentor. You need someone who is going to hold your hand every step of the way from A to Z, launching a campaign. And not only that, who can celebrate the success with you and whose experiences you can lean on, whose resources you can lean on. And I think that's so important. I'm not good at everything. There are a lot of things in my life that I am not good at. But when it comes to crowdfunding, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been doing this since 2012. And I know a lot. I've worked with so many creators, so many people, so many different types of products and projects, and everything from artistic stuff, right, to more the hardcore physical products and those types of things. So to me, whenever I would have a coaching student, I would have a great call with, and they'd be able to implement action. But then it's like a month or two later, they've kind of fallen off the horse, or they're now kind of lost. And it's so important that you just keep moving forward, getting through this process. If you've done another type of process in your life that you've really needed to get through, so for example, going on a run, right? If you stop midway on the run, it's so hard to finish. Once you've started and you stop, it's hard to start again. You know what I'm talking about? If you're going on a hike and you just have a really long break midway up the mountain, you're like, I don't want to go again, right? It's those short, infrequent breaks, and you keep moving, you keep moving, you keep moving, and you get through the process. Same is true if you're going to school, right? You take a break, it's like, I don't want to go back to school now. I just wish I got the thing over with. And it can be enjoyable, it can be fun, it can be an adventure to launch a Kickstarter campaign. I think it certainly is. But at the same time, you gotta keep moving. So what I've designed is a step-by-step blueprint for launching one of these campaigns, as well as bringing me on your team as a mentor and being able to interact with other like-minded people who are launching really cool stuff all the time. And that's kind of what I've designed after just being in the industry for so long and wanting to help people, and wanting to really do something that provides results and helps people take action towards their dreams and gives them accountability, and to really join a tight-knit group of founders and creators that are dedicated to the exact same thing. So if you feel like personally, not only do you want the templates, the blueprints, the checklists, the fill-outable guides and forms, and all that stuff that you can really easily just copy and paste and put together a campaign, but you also want that X factor. You also want to gain access to a mentor, me, and you also want to make sure that you're held accountable, that you want to have a system that you can tap into to propel you to success. That's what I call my mastermind, man. That is my crowdfunding mastermind. This is like an underground crowdfunding mastermind with super secret workshops that I put on, sharing stuff that I'm not sharing anywhere else. So if that sounds exciting or interesting to you, go to this link and learn a little bit more about it. The link is crowdcrux.com/mastermind. That link is crowdcrux.com/mastermind. crowdcrux.com/mastermind. Okay, that being said, thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate you so much. Leave me a rating and review on iTunes. And if you're watching this on YouTube, give me a thumbs up or subscribe as well. Thanks so much. My name is Sal, and I'll see you next time.